Now here's an interesting twist. It turns out that groups linked to the Chinese Communist Party are funding the anti-Israel protests around the world. Hey everyone, welcome to Inverted World. I'm your host, Dylan Roth. Did you think that all of these anti-Israel protests were just organic? Well, anybody paying attention can tell that they are clearly not. Just like all the other so-called progressive causes. How are they getting all the funding for the encampments at these universities? Why do all the tents look alike? Is that just a coincidence? Just a couple of weeks ago, it was revealed in mainstream media sources like Politico that these protests are backed by some of the biggest donors for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, including George Soros, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and David Rockefeller. This is all too familiar. This is exactly what was happening with BLM, with Antifa. These are highly coordinated movements with big funding. But here's something that you probably didn't know. A new report reveals that these organizations central to the anti-Israel and anti-American movements around the world are significantly funded and influenced by a network tied to the Chinese Communist Party, which, according to this report, seeks to advance a revolutionary anti-government and anti-capitalist agenda that threatens U.S. internal stability. This report comes out of the Network Contagion Research Institute, or NCRI, which details how the Shut It Down for Palestine movement has connections to the CCP through what is called the Singham Network, an umbrella for groups that use protests and social media campaigns to promote anti-Western narratives and to contribute to social unrest. How do they do this? The millionaire businessman behind this network, Neville Roy Singham, is a proclaimed Maoist and proud of it. He was a member of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, a Mao-influenced group that is based in Detroit, Michigan. Not only that, but this American financier, a former Huawei associate and founder of the software company ThoughtWorks, has worked closely with the Chinese government and is actively involved in CCP operations. Singham's association with far-left circles in the US dates back to at least the 1970s. According to a document dated June 5, 1974, Singham was the subject of an FBI investigation into his ties to groups engaged in activities inimical to the U.S. interests. Singham's connection with entities associated with the CCP is believed to have begun in the early 2000s. From 2001 to 2008, Singham served as a consultant for Huawei, a technology and telecommunications giant linked to the CCP that has been the subject of espionage investigations in Canada and the US. He currently lives and works in Shanghai, where he shares premises with Shanghai Maku Cultural Communications, a Chinese propaganda firm focused on presenting a positive image of the People's Republic of China to the global South. Prominent groups within the Shut It Down for Palestine coalition, including the Answer Coalition, the People's Forum, and the International People's Assembly, are all linked through financial and ideological ties to Neville Singham and his wife, Jody Evans. They are known for funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into pro-China communist movements through his network. Even the New York Times did their own report on Singham, which details extensively his history of working with the CCP. In 2021, one of the Singham Network's groups, called No Cold War, organized protests against the democracy movement in Hong Kong, as well as various Stop Asian Hate protests in London. Singham's wife, Jody Evans, is the founder of an anti-war group called Code Pink, which also promotes CCP propaganda. In fact, they actually deny the genocide against the Muslim Uyghur population in China and defend their internment. Yet, the Singham Network also organizes pro-Palestinian events. Interesting how this same group supports the Palestinian Muslims against against Israel, but will deny the genocide happening against Chinese Uyghur Muslims. The anti-Israel protests, among other causes, are funded by the Singham Network and exploit U.S. nonprofit regulations to funnel substantial sums into these protests that we are seeing on the streets and in the universities. This could very well be the money that is funding the identical looking tents on college campuses and literally giving a paycheck to the organizers of these protests. One of those groups, the People's Forum, admitted in 2021 that Singham was funding them and received millions through the Goldman Sachs Philanthropy Fund. The same goes for the Answer Coalition and the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Not only are these CCP-linked networks funding the protests, but they are also aligned with Palestinian terrorist groups, specifically the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and other extreme organizations. Most of the time, there are paid agitators at these types of protests, left-wing protests. We don't always know where the money comes from exactly, but what really made me suspicious was seeing the deeply ingrained hatred for America demonstrated at these events. You see them burning the American flag. At the University of North Carolina, we saw them trying to replace the American flag with a Palestinian one. Thankfully, some fraternity brothers stopped that from happening. But when you see all of that, this is exactly what destabilizing America looks like. The co-executive director of the People's Forum stated, "When we defeat Israel and the U.S. empire, we will know how to dismantle capitalism here in the United States." It's not an accident that anti-American and anti-Israeli sentiment goes hand in hand, because it's all an attack on Western civilization. Israel is the only ally with the West in that region. Israel is really where the East meets West. And time again, the CCP has infiltrated many progressive groups for the purpose of destabilization and spreading propaganda. Under the rule of Xi Jinping, China has expanded state media operations, teamed up with overseas outlets, and cultivated foreign influencers. The goal is to disguise propaganda as independent content. Mr. Singham's groups have produced YouTube videos that together racked up millions of views. The Singham Network also amplified anti-Israel activism not only through their social media accounts, but through pro-CCP media outlets like Breakthrough News. It makes you wonder if those independent TikTok videos about the genocide in Gaza are influenced by nefarious disinformation sources. It also doesn't surprise me that CCP networks are targeting the universities here in America. This is all part of the propaganda war when you ideologically subvert the younger population. Ex-KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov famously described what this ideological subversion looks like.
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions. It's divided in four basic stages. First one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students. As Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism. Your leftists in United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot.
Is it just a coincidence that civil unrest is a running theme in every recent presidential election cycle? This is the same thing that happened with Black Lives Matter in 2020. The goal is to threaten U.S. internal stability as we get closer to the election. Sounds like something that would certainly work in China's favor. In fact, Rebel News did an excellent report in 2020 showing the ties between Black Lives Matter and the CCP.
Who exactly benefits from the Black Lives Matter movement? It certainly isn't the families left to grieve the 38 children who have been slain in Chicago alone this year, which even includes babies, according to 5 Chicago News, and it also hasn't supported the large amount of Black-owned businesses that were destroyed during the protests for Black Lives. The Hustle shared just 3 of the many entrepreneur stories whose businesses were damaged during the chaos. Now, these were already businesses that managed to survive through the economic lockdown measures enforced as a response to COVID-19. According to Washington Post, Black businesses were already struggling 40% more than others due to restrictions. Now, according to one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors, the primary purpose of Black Lives Matter is, in fact, a matter of politics.
What we are going to push for is a move to get Trump out, while we're also going to continue to push and pressure Vice President Joe Biden around his policies and relationship to policing and criminalization. That's going to be important, but our goal is to get Trump out.
Ah, I see. The primary goal of Black Lives Matter's movement is to get Trump out. Makes sense. Even though racism existed before President Trump. Now, this really does broaden the types of groups and individuals that might benefit from the success of the Black Lives Matter movement, doesn't it? Maybe even governments who wish to exert their power and dominance over the world, like the Chinese Communist Party, would find some solace in the demise of the U.S. economy and civil unrest of its people. After all, it wouldn't be the first time civil unrest stemmed from racial inequalities was partly being manipulated to benefit a group who wanted something more out of America, something that has absolutely nothing to do with Black lives being protected. The communist plan was to bring violent revolution to America during the 1950s and 1960s civil rights movement. Take a look.
It was to be a communist revolution, but the great majority of the American people would not be allowed to realize that until it had already happened. If all goes according to the communist blueprint, Americans will believe that the chaos and violence has something to do with civil rights. Our enemies were quick to find our weakest point for their attack. They knew that racial differences could provide them with an excellent wedge to divide our people, to keep hammering on that wedge, to drive it deeper into our social structure. Having been on the inside of the Communist Party, it's easy for me to recognize this revolutionary agitation in disguise.
The self-proclaimed Marxist Black Lives Matter co-founder Alicia Garza also owns the Black Futures Lab project. A primary goal of the Black Future Lab works is to transform Black communities into constituencies that wield independent Black political power at the municipal, state, and federal level. Yet, all would be lost for the Black Future Lab if not for the Chinese Progressive Association, CPA. Right above the option to donate to the organization reads, Black Futures Lab is a fiscally sponsored project of the Chinese Progressive Association. As we pointed out in our article, donations to the Black Futures Lab don't go directly to the foundation itself. The Chinese Progressive Association gets them instead. According to the Heritage Foundation, the CPA began as a leftist pro-People's Republic of China organization promoting awareness of mainland China's revolutionary thought and workers' rights, dedicated to self-determination, community control, and serving the people.
So when pro-Hamas activists scream and shout that they speak for the people, remember who's paying them. Just as we must remember the buckets of corporate cash that went into funding Black Lives Matter. It became painfully obvious how much of a scam that was when we learned that BLM's co-founder admitted to using $6 million to buy a mansion and throw parties. Let's see what all this funding into Free Palestine is really going to be used for once these protests are over and their political agenda has been served. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Inverted World, and I will see you all next time.
We want to thank today's sponsor, Dr. Stella Emanuel. If you remember her from 2020 amid the pandemic, she went viral when she went on with America's frontline doctors, accurately purporting that social distancing and masking was nonsense, and shared her firsthand experience successfully treating patients with hydroxychloroquine. And what did they do? Smear her, of course. Well, she was right. Using the code FIGHTERS, you'll get 5% off any of her detox kits, COVID care, and more. Go to drstellamd.com for a list of all of her products, and don't forget to use the code FIGHTERS for a discount.